Well, okay. So hello everyone. I'm Ishtiaq. I am a senior scholar at Guru Gobind Singh University in New Delhi. I'm also the IASA media officer, so I represent the Emerging Scholars Forum here. I welcome everyone to this webinar, which is the second episode of the International American Studies Association's webinar series organized by the Emerging Scholars. This lecture is an initiative by IASA scholars to interact and deliberate with scholars around the world on diversified topics of American studies. You could learn about more about ESF and all our events in the brochure or on our website. The lecture format is pretty simple. It goes like the first 45 minutes, the speaker would give his lecture, and then we would have a question answer session of around 10 to 15 minutes, and then we add. Uh, Before we start, I'll just remind the viewers and the listeners about two important IASA academic events. The first one is the IASA regional chapters. So IASA plans to organize offline, online, or hybrid events across continents and regions. So proposals for IASA's regional chapters can be found on the website. The second one, and which is the most important one, is the deadline of the abstracts for the 12th IASA World Congress at Hacettepe University in Turkey. So the deadline has been extended to 15th December 2024. So please submit your abstracts by then. Okay, which brings me to the main man of the of the webinar. So we have today Professor Cem Kılıçarslan. He is an assistant professor in the Department of American Culture and Literature at Hacettepe University in Turkey, the host for our next IASA Congress. His MA thesis was on the postmodern doomsday novels of Kurt Vonnegut. Professor Ursuline teaches courses on science fiction and fantasy, American history, American political philosophy, translation, and film studies. He has currently co-edited a book on Turkish science fiction and is also working on a book project on understanding American history in the global context. We are really, really grateful to you, Professor, for giving us this time, and we look forward to your talk today. Please, you can take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Ishtihak. So I would like to start by thanking the IASA Emerging Scholars Forum for the invitation for the lecture. And I must firstly express my admiration and appreciation of the initiative, the forum, which I find very interesting, as most of the time we see these kind of initiatives under the umbrella title called graduate conferences, graduate studies. But as I see, the very concept of the emerging scholars is a very clever, a very apt and promising title to bring together early career academics. So I liked it very much and hope it will continue to be a very productive platform. Congratulations again. This is going to be a bit of informal, maybe, but I don't want to sound like a preacher while talking to early career academics, but I think sometimes I can take the liberty to say a couple of things which are more like confessions. The first one is, as proven by student feedback, is the fact that you teach best what you don't quite understand. Many of my colleagues may find it kind of absurd, as the opposite is more in line with common sense, that you teach what you have learned best and continue to work on and have eventually become an expert on, that your specialization. However, as experience has shown, what you have not quite understood becomes an ongoing discussion at the back of your mind in the rest of your career, and you become preoccupied with it. You must accept that things and ideas we deal with in humanities and cultural studies cannot actually be proven in the way things can be in the quantifiable sciences. And the fact sometimes creates the fake idea or illusion that literature and cultural studies are fuzzy fields where anything goes. And whatever you can say can be supported because someone has said something that supports it anyway. When you pick a subject of specialization, you actually learn all things that support it, but you also sense the shortcomings of these, and sometimes you have to deliberately ignore them to make your points consistent and provable. Otherwise, there is no thesis, no dissertation, no journal article. The same thing happened with me in early 90s when I started to work on postmodernism and Kurt Vonnegut, my favorite author, for my MA thesis. Postmodernism was the most important and dominant subject at the time, and the world of academia was bombarded with plethora of definitions on it. And I found during my research stage 25 different definitions and many tables which compared postmodernism with modernism. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And of course, with modernism, the movement it claimed to replace. I wrote my MA thesis focusing on the postmodernist techniques used by Kurt Vonnegut, which are black humor and metafiction in his two doomsday novels, Cat's Cradle and Slaughterhouse 5, and the thesis passed. But despite all the information available on postmodernism and Vonnegut, certain things at the back of my mind were not quite clear. Thank God, nobody in my defense committee asked questions about these, and this is another thing I learned at this stage. Actually, you know that question that will best refute your points with counter arguments, but you cannot get locked inside a quagmire of argumentation and must create safe and working exit points out of them. I did not look back much after that, neither to postmodernism nor to Vonnegut, but one grand question remained. What was he? The best and most exemplary postmodern writer to teach and understand postmodernism, or somebody that has something that does not quite fit the definition, despite a significant amount of proof that he's a postmodern author? One thing I learned about Vonnegut was that he was a very, very easygoing person who at times joined the young people sitting on the grass in front of his Cape Cod house or Manhattan brownstone. And during my Fulbright visit to the USA in 2002, I found a day off to rush and visit him. I had heard that he would most of the times bring a six-pack of beer to go with his Pall Mall cigarettes and share them with the young people waiting for him to show up. I had 2 cans of beer in my backpack, and feeling a bit anxious and awkward, I went and sat in front of his house. There were not many people around, and I was not sure that he was home. I spent something between 45 minutes to an hour, and he did not show up. It was stupid anyway, and I did not have the courage to knock on his door and say, "Hey, I'm a graduate student from Turkey, and I wrote my master's thesis on your novels, and I have a few questions." It would be really awkward, and instead I opened one of the cans and offered a toast to his house and said to myself, "Next time, Kurt." But before the next time came, he died in 2007. And he taught me another thing about life and time. You don't mess with time. If you want to do something, you have to do it now, assuming there will be never another time to do it. Actually, time and nature of time has a central place in Vonnegut's work. He was obsessed with it, and that's why he was generally referred to as the great connoisseur of time and chaos. Vonnegut stayed with me after that, and while deciding on the subject of my speech for this forum, I was drawn to the issue of metamodernism. And actually and ironically, now I am the advisor to a graduate student who happens to be among you there, who is writing her MA thesis on metamodernism, and I have to learn and deal with the subject myself. Metamodernism is an ongoing discussion on what to call the next step after postmodernism. And while we refer to it as recent, metamodernism has actually been around since the turn of the century. It emerged as an alternative to a plethora of other terms which are used to explain changes in the cultural and intellectual world taking place in this century. 2 Dutch scholars, Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van der Akker, published an article called Metamodernism in 2010. Basically, metamodernism can best be explained by the metaphor of a pendulum that swings between the 2 poles of modernism and postmodernism. Here I must start my presentation and request your confirmation that it fires up okay. Is it okay now?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So this is the famous or infamous pendulum, the metaphor which is used to express or explain what metamodernism is. The pendulum of metamodernism actually does not swing back and forth between the 2 poles, the modern and the postmodern, to create a balance, some say. Conversely, the pendulum moves between a multitude of poles, they argue, and each time it moves in the direction of fanaticism the gravity pulls it back to irony. And when its irony swings towards apathy, gravity pulls it back towards enthusiasm, and so on. Sometimes the more recent concept of new sincerity is also considered to be an offshoot of this movement. I must confess, from the onset, I grew a bit suspicious of this movement, not only the metamodernism itself, but the movement of the pendulum, as it brings into mind many questions. Who decides when to move, in which direction and how much? What is this mysterious gravity that maintains the constant negotiation, obviously and consciously making decisions? The metaphor is based on the assumption of an authority, unless someone creates another metaphor of the invisible hand which self-corrects. And obviously, this is the authority of the author. Hence, the essence of the movement is more modern than postmodern. It sounds like taking a step back from the extremes of postmodernism towards a more modernist stance. It also sounds more like a mode of shifting sensibilities, a version of pragmatism, which is based on relative truths of postmodernism. Modernism was based on the questioning of the subject, what and who am I? What and how can I know the reality? Postmodernism, on the other hand, asked, what is reality? And can we even be sure whether it exists? Metamodernism, in turn, is based on affective dominant, which asks, what do I feel in this reality? Pointing to focusing on the emotion rather than rationality, and the sort of an invitation into what is called today mindfulness or navel gazing. To understand postmodernism, we have to consider the existence of two layers. One is the more visible layer, the layer of themes and techniques that you see above the line here. And generally speaking, and sometimes wrongly, it is considered that existence of these themes and techniques in a contemporary work produced in the second half of the 20th century is enough to call it postmodern. However, the postmodern was more a sentiment which came into being after the atomic bomb, man's gaining ability to end his existence in the most advanced cultures. It was the literature and art of exhaustion, as John Barth called it in 1967, and nihilism. To fully understand, if it is possible, postmodernism, one must actually question not the upper layer, but the lower substratum, what actually a postmodern work makes as the final commentary on human condition. Is there hope, even in the face of meaningless existential events, such as the Holocaust and other genocides, atomic disasters, and mutually assured destruction doctrines? This issue can, in my opinion, like a key element in understanding the difference between different movements, such as modernism, postmodernism, and others. I think at this point, it would be very useful to remember and compare the two key figures, William Faulkner, the modernist, and Samuel Beckett, the postmodern playwright, just to exemplify the discussion. Both of these writers were awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, but their reactions were very different. As you see in William Faulkner, I'm not going to hold it, but in 1949, he was given the Nobel Prize for Literature. He first rejected it, but later accepted on condition that he does not receive the money, but he wants to give a speech. And he wore his, smoking dress and gave this grand speech in which he said, I decline to accept the end of man. It is easy enough to say that man is immortal simply because he will endure. That when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded from the last worthless rock hangings, tideless in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will still be one more sound, that his puny, inexhaustible voice still talking. William Faulkner was a believer. So in the next opera, which I'm sure you're familiar with the text, I'm just reading the final line. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man. It can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail. That was the modernist spirit, that the belief in man, in the creation of a center through art and literature, whatever. And compare this with Samuel Beckett, the postmodern. 20 years later, he was given the Nobel Prize for his writing, which in new forms of the novel and drama, in the destitution of modern man, acquires this elevation. So it was a kind of a bit polemical that there was a great deal of discussion in the committee that they didn't want to award him because they found them, they didn't understand them. For example, the head of the selection committee said, I do not dispute the artistic effect of Beckett's dramas, but his misanthropic satire of the Swift type or radical pessimism of the Leopardi type, has a powerful heart, which, in my opinion, is lacking in Beckett. That Beckett was not a believer. Karl Ragnar Gerov, another member of the committee, countered that claim, saying that his nihilism is not a kind of hopelessness. It portrays humanity as we have all seen it at the moment of its most severe violation. So in him, there is the possibility of rehabilitation, he claims. But see what happened. When Beckett learned that he was awarded the prize, he called it a disaster. He did not reject the prize, he took the money. And some say he donated to Trinity College Dublin. Some say he spent the money because instead of joining the ceremony and giving this grand speech, he takes his wife, goes to Tunis for holiday. So from the moment you can ask, what is this man? I mean, isn't he a believer in what he does, that he does not believe in literature, the very thing that he does? He's a total nihilist. The difference between Faulkner and Beckett is also obvious. So if the manifestation of themes and techniques do not define postmodernism, so what is it at the end of the day? A shared sense of this utter hopelessness about the human condition? Or was it a protest? Or was it a protest, a call for awakening? I believe most postmodern writers can be interpreted in either way. And even Beckett was given the prize, believing that his pessimism and absurdism was an attempt at demonstrating the destitution of the modern man. But his response hardly justifies the decision. It is at this point I present my simple argument that Vonnegut and his works are more in line with metamodernism than postmodernism itself. This simple argument may be important not in the sense that we understand Vonnegut and postmodernism better, but actually this understanding may shed light on other forms of postmodernism as well, giving the scholar and the critic some criterion to also understand define works associated with metamodernism. I will refer to Vonnegut's use of black humor and metafiction to illustrate this. This slide that I skipped, but these are the obviously there is the idea that postmodernism is over, but we need a new name for whatever happened. The next thing, these are under the title postmodernism, and you see is a list of terms that are offered for the age that we live in. Vonnegut uses black humor, metafiction, and many other postmodern techniques and elements. But what he achieves at the end is questionable, as there have been views showing Vonnegut as a nihilistic writer as well. Excuse me, my presentation. Okay. Slaughterhouse-Five is now seen as a political fable that preaches quietism, as one cannot control one's fate, so one should simply allow things happen, writes Merrill. And Vonnegut's novels Cask Cradle and Slaughterhouse-Five together, as I will be talking about during the speech, among others, illustrate the decay of reformist hopes. Vonnegut's resignation anticipates the argument that his vision and cosmos are relentlessly pessimistic. And as David Bosworth argues in The Literature of America, Vonnegut recommends pessimism, cynicism, resignation, and despair. Moreover, as Charles B. Harris states, Vonnegut's belief in a purposeless universe constitutes Vonnegut's absurdist vision, which does not leave any room for protest in his novels. Protest, writes Harris, implies hope for reform. Like most novelists of the absurd, however, Vonnegut entertains little hope for either social or individual reform. Cosmic absurdity informs all things, including man and his institutions. Okay, the question is that so? A brief discussion of Vonnegut's use of black humor and Cask Cradle, and later his use of metafiction in Slaughterhouse-Five would be helpful. And Kurt Vonnegut's Cask Cradle is a satirical science fiction novel that explores themes of religion, science, and the absurdity of human behavior. The story follows a writer, John or Jonah, as he investigates the life of Felix Honecker, and the fictional inventor of the atomic bomb and the substance called Ice-9, a crystalline form of water that freezes at room temperature and poses a catastrophic threat to the planet. As John delves into Honecker's life, he encounters the strange religion of Bakunonism. founded on lies intended to bring comfort. The narrative unfolds on the fictional Caribbean island of San Lorenzo, where political instability, scientific hubris, and the followers of Buchanan collide. Through dark humor and biting commentary, Vonnegut critiques humanity's blind faith in technology, institutions, and the pursuit of progress at the expense of morality and survival. In defining black humor, Charles B. Harris point out that the distinction between black humor and satire should be marked. For Harris, the difference is chiefly in the protagonist of the two forms, and this is important to understand Cask Riddle. Quote, the black humor protagonist is at once observer of and participant in the drama of dissidence, detached from and yet affected by what happens around him. Extremely conscious of his situation, he is radically different from the satiric puppets. And as Robert Scholes noticed, the black humorist is not concerned with what to do about life, but how to take it. In this respect, what separates black humor from existentialist attitude is the difference between seeing the universe as absurd and seeing it as ridiculous, as a joke. The black humorists offer the reader something better than scorn. They offer the reader laughter. Vonnegut's fictional prophet Buchanan in the novel suggests a good posture for man on the mountaintop at the end of the novel. Quote, what man must learn is neither scorn nor resignation, say the black humorist, but how to take a joke. Thus, while Vonnegut emphasizes the meaninglessness of human life, the response he seeks is neither stoic resignation nor scorn, but laughter. Even though the contemporary novelist mocks literature, they have some faith in its efficiency. Although many traditional satiric and comic techniques do appear in black humorists' novels, theirs is not the fate of the traditional satirists who hopes to reform society through ridicule and invective, nor of the traditional writer of comedy who hopes to better mankind by exposing folly and wickedness. It should be pointed out that many black humor novels share the characteristics of absurdism, as, quote, the belief that ours is an absurd universe, chaotic and without meaning, unquote. Absurdism became the vision of many fiction writers who share the notion of black humor. The absurdist vision can be summarized as the level of representation, when black humor could not help in defining the ridicule and nonsense of the situation. For the absurdist, black humor was only the first step to portray the chaotic universe, and in the absurdist novel of the 60s, the absurd universe is represented in the form of ridiculous events and by the caricatured characters. Cask Riddle, in this sense, is a mock apocalyptic novel, satirizing the element of doomsday and apocalypses, confronting the largest possible danger in life, mankind's self-destruction. In the novel, though it is not it is only in order to find a vehicle for exploring the way in which human pretenses and inventions might properly serve us. Vonnegut flirts with the idea of death of all creation. Cask Riddle is a book about the illusion of a purposeful universe. Like most of Vonnegut's novels, it can be read on one level as a novel of protest against the destructive powers of science, and this is especially evident in Vonnegut's portrayal of Felix Honecker. Totally uninterested in people, Honecker, who is the epitome of scientific objectivity and Nobel Prize laureate, remains oblivious to the effects of his discoveries may have on mankind. More a naive child than a father of three, Honecker treats science as a game, his discoveries as happy accidents. As an anecdote told by his midget son, Newt, explains, following the nuclear bomb of Hiroshima, when a fellow scientist remarks that science has now known sin, Honecker replies, what is sin? Honecker's indifference towards life, outer to his own being, is represented in his answers to Miss Faust. After her absolutely true statement, God is love, Honecker asks, what is God? What is love? So Cask Riddle is a novel about the varieties of truth available to man, scientific, religious, political, social, economic, and humanistic. Quote, live by the FOMA that make you brave and kind and healthy and happy, unquote, suggests Vonnegut through the prophet Buchanan as the very first lines of the novel. A novel is, according to Vonnegut, is a harmless untruth as well, as the footnote explains on the book's cover. In the form of playful and amusing religion of Buchananism, Vonnegut is careful to show how simple literature does the same for anyone who is fully aware of the novel's playmaking. The narrator is a writer. Cass Cradle begins with his attempts to write one book, which he called The Day the World Ended, and ends with his having written another, Cat's Cradle, instead. And along the way, he's quick to defend the writer's duty, and I think this is very important, which is, quote, a sacred obligation to produce beauty and enlightenment and comfort at top speed, unquote. The writer narrator states, quote, when a man becomes a writer, he takes on the sacred obligation to produce that beauty and enlightenment and comfort at top speed. However, Bokononism is not an opiate, nor is it irresponsible. It is not a turning away at all, but rather an acceptance of the finite for what it is, as part of the whole truth. The single identified saint in the novel is Julian Castile, who, quote, forestalled all references to his possible saintliness by talking out of the corner of his mouth like a movie gangster, unquote. Despite his saving thousands of lives on the island, Castle is aware of and appreciates his grotesque situation, as an excess of horrible is faced and defeated by the only friend reason can rely on in such cases, laughter. Bokononism is one religion which accommodates the finite, as I said. In a whimsical manner, a psalm like Calypso reminds the reader that, quote, we do doodly do what we must, muddily must, until we bust, bodily bust, unquote. In the novel, black humor appears in the form of Vonnegut's comic perspective on contemporary aspects of the old collision between science and religion. The book is dominated by two characters who are off stage for most part of the book, a brilliant scientist and the founder of a new religion. The very confrontation in the book between science and religion is aimed at developing the cruel paradox that lies at the center of Bokononist thought, as it lies at the center of our world, the heartbreaking necessity of lying about reality and the heartbreaking impossibility of lying about it. So, Vonnegut's novel manages to transpose high seriousness into new and wildly comic key. Moral questions exhaust themselves quickly with radical wisdom, providing a new alternative for what, quote, was to be a Christian book, unquote. As the first sentence in the mythical books of Bokonon puts it, quote, all through things I am about to tell you are shameless lies, unquote. As the moral lesson, the narrator warns, quote, anyone unable to understand how a useful religion can be founded on lies will not understand this book either, unquote. Just as the made-up Bokononist religion keeps its members aware of the artificial drama they are playing, so does Cat's Cradle draw attention to its artifice of form. For each work, according to Vonnegut, there is no danger of the reader or the worshippers mistaking either case for solid truth. When religions are accepted as solid truths, then the human being experiences religious wars and persecutions. Similarly, when novels ask to be read as history, their transformative power is sapped. Only through fictive qualities of novels can the reader transform himself. So Vonnegut in Cat's Cradle offers the concept of FOMA as a harmless untruths, which are the key elements of Bokononism. Bokononism is a kind of religion which accepts that it's based on lies. And uh, Jerome Klinkowitz asks, why is religion a valid pretense, whereas love and art are not, unquote. His opinion is that the answer lies with the peculiar state of modern man and with his need for a unique religion. Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle offers FOMA as harmless untruths, which, and Klinkowitz asked about them, why is, sorry, excuse me, I repeat that sentence. Klinkowicz's opinion is that the answer about Bokononism is that it's a religion of alienation because it carefully removes evil from self and deposits it in a finitude granted real existence, not a finitude vaguely reflective of ideal men. The writer accepts the methodology of religion by seeking the ultimate meaning of things. The joking in Bokononism does not diminish the pains of life. Instead, it's a fundamental reordering of man's values, solving the problem which has made man uncomfortable as the center of universe. Wiley Cypher decries egocentric romanticism and charges that it has alienated man from himself. Vonnegut begs that we still trust the most ridiculous superstition of all, that humanity is at the center of the universe. And I think by saying this, he comes close to the very essence of modernist thought. And so he proves that to sustain such a position, quote, all that is required is that we become less selfish than we are, unquote. The selfishness, however, is strong enough to have spawned a heresy and determined men's expression in art. Shaping a new religion which could substitute a whole system of beliefs is no small achievement. Cascradle relieves man of his unbearable egocentric responsibility for the conditions of existence. Granted that the world can become absurd and that any good life may be unlivable, at this point, Vonnegut's man surrenders, having, quote, the good manners to die, unquote. And with great composure and respectability, quote, turn the humor back on jokes, unquote. So religion, according to Bokononism, is on the side of art. Art lies in humanity. By its nature, it is subversive of nationhood and national history. Not because of its prophetic stance toward questions of justice, but on the contrary, precisely because it is non-political. And here I must visit, an interview made by the Playboy. I think Playboy was very intellectual in the 60s and 70s. There are very interesting interviews, which I don't know what happened to them later. When they ask, beyond the fact that it has become a profitable way to make a living, why do you write to Vonnegut? And he responds, my motives are political. I agree with Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini that the writer should serve his society. I differ with dictators as to how writers should serve. Mainly, I think they should be, and biologically have to be, agents of change for the better, we hope. And the question goes on biologically, and I'm not going to read the whole text, but somewhere in the middle he says, and when a society is in great danger, we are likely to sound alarms. I have the canary bird in the coal mine theory of the arts. You know, coal miners used to take birds down into the mines with them to detect gas before men got sick. The artists certainly did that in the case of Vietnam. They chirped and keeled over, but it made no difference whatsoever. Nobody important cared. But I continue to think that artists, all artists, should be treasured as alarm systems. So it is impossible for Vonnegut to cease writing because the act of writing is his service towards people. What distinguishes Vonnegut from many other postmodern writers in this aspect is his willingness, his sense of duty towards artistic creation as duty and service. Like many of his contemporaries, Vonnegut is totally aware of art or fiction's insufficiency in dealing with the absurdity of the universe, but nevertheless, he continues to write despite the fact that he considers this duty as giving hope, though false in the form of lies, to people who are dying or in terrible pain. For the artists, it is impossible to cease creating because that would be a total loss of man's already diminished role in a cruel environment. And I think this brings him very, very close to Faulkner's statements. So the position of the artist or writer is similar to that of the police and firemen. Okay. While converting my presentation from Mac PC to Mac, some certain things got. There was supposed to be a here. Okay, I think it's disappeared. And here I should move to the next novel for my discussion, Slaughterhouse 5, and how he uses metafiction this time. Slaughterhouse is a profound anti-war novel, blending science fiction, dark humor, and autobiographical elements. It follows Billy Pilgrim, a hapless American soldier who becomes unstuck in time, experiencing moments of his life out of sequence. Central to his central story is Billy's survival of the Allied firebombing of Dresden during World War II, which he witnesses while held as a prisoner of war in a slaughterhouse. Billy's life also includes alien abduction by the Tralfamadors, extraterrestrial beings who perceive all time simultaneously, teaching him their philosophy of accepting life's events as inevitable. Through Billy's fragmented journey, Vonnegut examines the futility of war, the fragility of human existence, and the struggle to find meaning in a chaotic universe. The refrain, "So it goes," underscores the inevitability of death and destruction, The novel finds an effective way out of this endlessly permutational system of existence, the use of overtly metafictional and, in particular, parodistic devices. The novel opens with a direct address to the reader in the situation of reading and a metalingual discourse upon the construction of the plot and the relation of history to discourse. Here, the reader is reminded that the events and descriptions in the novels are always creations of that which is to be described, that the language in this sense refers ultimately to itself. Throughout the novel, the reader is reminded that what he has been reading is a creation, neither history nor life itself. Vonnegut plays with possibilities of combination. The techniques like irony provide them with escape rules from the endless permutations of systems. Metafictional novelists are, of course, often regarded as escapists. This is partly a consequence of their tendency to assimilate so-called escapist popular forms. Most metafiction writers are self-consciously anxious to assert that, although literary fiction is only a verbal reality, through language it constructs an imaginative world that has, within its own terms, full referential status as an alternative to the world in which we live. Fictional statements exist and have their truth within the context of an alternative world, which they also create. Vonnegut suggests that reality definitely exists beyond the text, but may only be reached through the text. Slaughterhouse-Five suggests that realism is an inadequate means of portraying experiences like the firebombing of Dresden during the Second World War, in which more than 100,000, and some say 130,000 people died. Vonnegut even breaks the frame of Dresden section by appearing in it himself, quote, as an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls, unquote. However, he cannot, nor does his novel, embrace an aesthetic that ignores the responsibility of literary fiction to engage with history, with the temporal world. Vonnegut's historical world stands in relation to Tralfamadore, the alien world. The book suggests that the construction of alternative worlds should not be an activity that ignores the events and logic of the historical world, but should provide an unfamiliar perspective on that world. Thus, if novels cannot prevent disasters like Dresden, they can at least change people's attitudes towards them. If the novelist does not assume such responsibility, then the function of the novel will indeed become one of providing, quote, touches of color in rooms with all white walls, or of describing blowjobs artistically, unquote. It is not at all certain that Vonnegut does not believe this to be already the case, but he does continue to write. Billy Pilgrim is an innocent, sensitive man who encounters so much death and so much evidence of hostility to the human individual while he's in the war that he takes refuge in an intense fantasy life. He becomes unstuck in time, and his present moments may either give way to intense re-experiencing of moments from the past or unexpected hallucinations of life in the future. And like Vonnegut's, Billy Pilgrim is a survivor of the Dresden firebombing, and in coming to terms with his own memories of that event, Vonnegut explores the assets, the liabilities of madness itself. And as the character says, quote, I learned on Tralfamadore that when a person dies, he only appears to die. He's still very much alive in the past, so it is very silly for people to see him as that person. Vonnegut's novel, unquote, Vonnegut's novel manages to transpose high seriousness into a new, wildly comic key. And for the time constraints, I have to skip a couple of paragraphs. In the novel, Vonnegut, as both the narrator and the writer, returns to Dresden, but his purpose is completely different from reporting the issue. He does not go back, or as he calls, look back, to remember how it was or to experience again the disaster. Vonnegut merely tries to revise his vision of that tragic, absurd, and traumatic moment. So in a self-reflexive manner, he confronts the revision of the experience. In other words, the novel functions to reveal new viewpoints applying the principles of the theory of relativity, which broke through the concepts of absolute space and time. Okay, and I have to speed up a bit. And hence, Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five sets the real world against a fictional world and an ultra-fictional world with which Billy Pilgrim communicates, the Tralfamadore. Tralfamadore is an art world whose artificial form and philosophical beliefs are echoed in the form of the novel we are reading with its overtly spatial structure, with its circular songs. Nevertheless, it is difficult to believe the idea, as observed by many scholars, that Slaughterhouse-Five is a novel which recommends resigned acceptance as the proper response to the absurdity of life. All these observations are in conflict with what the writer himself explained on many different occasions. This misinterpretation is partly based on the assumption that Billy Pilgrim is a character symbolizing Vonnegut. As I stated earlier, Vonnegut interferes in his own book to avoid such misunderstandings. There are many other items in the book to make this distance between Vonnegut and Billy Pilgrim clear. Naming a few, Billy Pilgrim, for example, does not object to his sons joining Green Berets and going to Vietnam War, although he himself has experienced the disaster of war. Whereas Vonnegut, in the opening chapter of the novel, declares that he has told his sons not to take part in any massacre. Another contrast between the writer and his character is that while Billy Pilgrim believes in the God's commandment to Lot and his family not to look back upon the demolition of Sodom and Gomorrah, Vonnegut cannot help looking back as Lot's wife and becomes a pill of salt. So within the perspectives of the Trafalgarian scheme, which enables Vonnegut to overcome the problems of change, ambiguity, and subjectivity, which are involved in objectifying the events surrounding the disaster of Dresden, the Trafalgarian structure gives Billy Pilgrim a dimension, which is a new concept of reality and life philosophy in the form of a prayer. Quote, God grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom always to tell the difference. But this motto is meaningless, as the following explanation by Vonnegut shows, quote, among the things Billy Pilgrim could not change were the past, the present, and the future. Hence, there is no way for Billy Pilgrim to change, to cause a change in life, which in turn leads him to a total acceptance of this helpless position. Okay, I think I should slowly move to the conclusion. There is much disagreement on whether Kurt Vonnegut's novels are optimistic or pessimistic, and this is where I started this very simple argumentation. But a brief analysis of Slaughterhouse-Five from this perspective reveals that there is an element of hope in the novel. Yet it has been noted that Vonnegut's hope is unique. I think this is what makes him misunderstood, because it is hidden in the very unimportant sections of the novel. At the end of Slaughterhouse-Five, when the catastrophic firebombing of Dresden is over and Billy Pilgrim is set free from prison, the season is spring, the time of rebirth and renewal, and as the birds chirp pooty wheat. So in more than 200 pages of the book, a complete image of generation and death, a unification of the good and bad sides of life to make a single union, Slaughterhouse-Five presents the same argument, acceptance of death as inevitable together with the possibility of rebirth. From a Tralfamadorian perspective, which Billy Pilgrim comes to adopt, death is not a horrible human experience, but is only a temporarily awful situation of man. In other moments of his life, the dead person is as alive as anybody else. So Vonnegut, in his final judgment, concludes that despite the unavoidable reality of death, in man's creation, in art, in his very fiction, there are always qualities of immortal human values such as love, faith, and hope for everlasting continuation. And Vonnegut's main aim is to show that it is the writer's duty to keep the tension brought about from the two contradictory situations alive. When carefully inspected, the seemingly hopeless endings of his works are in fact mixed with great promises for the future. Here I quote from one of his interviews. And it's been university experience that taught me that there is a very good reason that you catch people before they become generals and presidents and so forth, and you poison their minds with humanity. And however you want to poison their minds, it's presumably to encourage them to make a better world, unquote. Hence, going back to metamodernism, we can conclude that the seemingly unclear definition of the swinging pendulum and how much it moves in every motion has been explained by Kurt Vonnegut's unique blending of human desperation with incessant hope for the future through the creation of art and literature, which brings him closer to Faulkner's statements. So his two novels exemplify a unique blending of human desperation with a subtle undercurrent of hope for the future. His narratives, rich with dark humor and existential questioning, highlight the absurdities and tragedies of human behavior while offering glimpses of resilience and the possibility of meaning amidst chaos. This delicate balance resonates with the principles of metamodernism, which oscillates between the earnest idealism of modernism and the skepticism of postmodernism. Vonnegut's stories reject absolute cynicism, embracing instead a bittersweet acknowledgement of humanity's flaws, coupled with a yearning for connection and understanding. By weaving humor, irony, and sincerity, Vonnegut crafts a narrative space that reflects both the despair of human folly and the enduring hope for progress and redemption. Vonnegut knows when to stop the swinging of pendulum and when to go another direction. And his works, I believe, will fit any syllabus on both postmodernism and metamodernism. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the extension of time, I think.
Professor Cem, you can just unshare your screen now.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay. I know it was a bit kind of longer than I expected, and my slideshow somehow did not quite agree with me. But anyway, I think you overall managed to follow my basic point that in trying to understand metamodernism, I could not help but, remember Vonnegut, which seemed to offer everything that the metamodernists trying to, find ways to define what it is. Thank you very much.
I think we're very much on time, and thank you so much for this informative and very interesting lecture. Especially for scholars like us who are still stuck on Eliot's modernism. I think metamodernism and postmodernism was really, it was a lot. And before we go on to the questions, I'll just start with a fundamental question of American studies for you. I was looking at metamodernism, and I found out that it's primarily a movement in American literature. Do you see, why this is the case?
I think I'm not so sure whether it's very popular. Americans could be just, because of their market philosophy or market-based thinking, maybe quickly jump at and just kidnap the term and just write articles and books on that. But I think originally metamodernism is a Dutch idea that it emerged. Well, there are some cases that the metamodernism as a word was used. I think it's Mesut Zavarzadeh who first used that term much earlier, but his metamodernism was, what I'm saying is metamodernism used before 2000 and before 2005 is a different one. So the proper metamodernism that we should be talking about should be actually that came into being in the 21st century, and it is kind of a proposal to understand certain kind of work, but primarily it was a manifestation of things that people detected happening in architecture and other forms of more visual and performance-related activities. The literature came later. I think I'm not so sure myself that there's certain kind of works which are defined as metamodern novels are metamodern at all, because they seem to be still, moving between different places. And I think calling them metamodern is a kind of just like creating a fake umbrella term. I'm not so sure whether Americans have the dominance over the term, because to me, especially for performative arts and architecture, it could be more European. But in literature, you may be right.
Okay. Thank you so much. We can start with Emilio. Yes, Emilio.
Yes, thank you for the beautiful presentation. As Ishtiaq anticipated, I believe that it was very informative as well. And as a matter of fact, I agree with your conclusions that the balancing and the pendulum that come with this metamodern definition fit Kurt Vonnegut very well. But I want to challenge this point a little bit. What if we could find the same pendular relationship between sincerity and fragmentation, for example, in every postmodern writer? In other words, what is postmodernism? And specularly, what is metamodernism as a category, especially for understanding literature. Because it seems to me, as far as I've been reading about it these latest weeks, it seems like a very fluid cultural category. And as a literary category, I am still not sure, but it's my ignorance, probably. I'm still not sure that it helps us answer a lot of questions, a lot of specific questions about these works. Yes, please.
Okay. Your ignorance, my confusion, they also point to the fact that there is something which has not settled, which we're trying to understand, which is right, which is quite correct in that. Yeah, you actually very cleverly asked that goddamn question that would refute all my points. That is, that what if all postmodern works actually had this hope lurking somewhere? I mean, not directly pointed, but this is an idea. But there is also there are also some critics. That's why I have a slide which disappeared. There was a split in postmodernism, that is, which is totally nihilistic. Some people calling themselves totally unplugged from life. The other one is, while showing is actually hiding or making indirect commentary about the existence of hope. The reason why I am showing this negative thing is because I want to give you hope. And I think even Samuel Beckett, that's why. That's the actual discussion about his being awarded the Nobel Prize, that there was a very big discussion. They could not decide whether they should award him, because Nobel Prize for Literature is itself a modernist concept, that you have to give it to a person who deserves it. And Faulkner just deserved it, but Beckett somehow, who was Beckett? They just tried to maybe, I think there is a bit of over-interpretation when talking about postmodernism, that we read too much into these works. I mean, some works are totally nihilistic, but what is nihilism? A kind of showing man that his bad condition so that he can just pull himself together. So we have to do something, or it's just that some sort of, abandonment, a total detachment. And I think this is what you're asking. What is postmodernism, and can't the same thing works? Yes. If we work hard enough, if we just, squeeze them, we can just put them into metamodern pendulum theory as well. But I think Kurt Vonnegut is too postmodern, too obviously postmodern, but at the same time, very hopeful, very metamodern as well. The others require a bit of, I think, mental gymnastics or some kind of extra interpretation to do that. I'm not sure. I'm not a full expert on all postmodern authors. Maybe somebody can just show another name.
The idea that I had is, I've read an article recently that talked about Thomas Pynchon, which I am studying at the moment.
Pynchon, yes.
No, and the article basically said, maybe not even Pynchon is a postmodernist. And because we tend to define postmodernism on the terms of Pynchon, but then Pynchon also has a lot of characteristics that we could. So I think that this makes us ask a question about our categories. Are we maybe too positivist in we should need some more postmodernism to deconstruct our will to fit reality into categories? What categories are useful if they help us answer questions, right?
I think,
so what is the question in Vonnegut that is answered by the category of postmodernism? That's what I was asking.
Okay, but I think what I'm indirectly saying is that the real problem here, we're talking about metamodernism, but the reason why there are problems about all these postmodernisms, that the real question is the nature of postmodernism. We don't understand it, as you said. We have to read. We don't understand postmodernism, the thing in between. Maybe 100 years later, maybe 50 years later, people just look back with a fresh mind, with different concepts, and say that was a temporary confusion, and just people thought that things like pastiche, montage, all these kinds brought together. It was a kind of really degenerate transitional period, or as some people called it, cultural logic of the late capitalism, as a kind of fiasco, which we pay too much attention to. So that would refute my that wouldn't refute my MA thesis, because I picked from at that point I just sensed that there is a problem of definition with that thing. But you're right. I think this is a question more than an answer. But I think the biggest problematic lies in the essence or heart of postmodernism. We don't know what it is. I don't know. So you don't either. Okay, that makes us two.
Okay, thank you, Emilio. We can have question. We can have a question from Ismail. If you're available, Ismail.
Hello. Yes. Hello. Excuse me.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. Am I clear? Is my voice clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for the discussion, for the talk. It made me consider a lot of things as well. I actually had a very similar question to Emilio's, and I was going to talk about Pynchon as well. Like while you were talking, I was thinking about especially the later Pynchon novels like Mason and Dixon and Vineland and Inherent Vice, and how my thesis is about Pynchon, and I was thinking about some of these metamodernistic characteristics as well, and how they had hope, especially at the end of the books, still kind of like instilled. And it got me thinking about some of DeLillo's book, like Underworld as well. I was gonna work off of that, but Emilio pretty much just asked what I was gonna ask. So thank you, Emilio. I just wanted to ask.
This is a forum. This is a forum. Emilio, feel free to comment, because you said something about Pynchon. Maybe you can just add some more comment if he's right. Okay. Yes.
I was just gonna ask. You talked about how maybe in the future, we'll look back at postmodernism as some confusion. It got me thinking at like 19th century laissez-faire economic policies and how they are looked at today. So what I just kind of wanted to work off of Emilio's question and ask. Since some of these characteristics that you said were in Vonnegut's work are, I think at least, also present in some other postmodern writers as well. How do you think this will affect the literature going forward? Do you think more things like this will come out and more writers will be placed in the metamodernist category? And how has all the writings that have come before, like, is this something special to Vonnegut, or do you think this will become kind of like a trend that will catch on? And if so, how will this really affect the 20th century, the literature studies? I wanted to hear your opinion on this.
Well, I agree with the oscillation thing in one sense, not necessarily about metamodernism. It's just that recent Trump election and Trumpism. Of course, we live in the kind of academia. We are mostly, close to liberal way of thinking. And but what societies are going through, and I teach also American history. So you see that American history is also an oscillation between liberal and somehow suddenly it swerves to right. From 1960s, the glorification of these human rights things, suddenly you swerve to Nixon's and Reagan's, and then you lose things. And now when you're talking about Obama's and Clinton's, suddenly you have the man. So I think the society is also swinging from left to right, finding today's LGBT movements, which I think the right uses them very effectively, pointing to certain kind of, incongruities or certain kind of mental flaws or whatever, to purport that the liberal thinking is flawed. We don't need the search of the liberal thinking, but we know that clear idea, make America great, is a kind of invitation. It's something bigger than politics. It's actually a call to, we know who we are, a very bold claim. Because when you try to make America great again, you already assume it's well-established America, or a concept of Americanness. And this is not only true for America. All countries are trying. This happens in Italy and other countries. That is, we know who we are, and we don't want to change. And I think literature, on the one hand, dominated by more liberal ideas, will go its own way, but society will, I think, detach itself from these liberals and artists and more democratic-minded individuals. I think bad times are coming for us because we live in the age of democracy. which is not democracy. This is mostly majoritarianism. And tomorrow we may find our fields, our subjects, our departments closed down or scaled down, not enough, or just crippled through budgets because they don't need people like us. And that kind of literature, I fear that there will be more good literature, but I also fear that there will be less readership. There's going to be more reaction towards these ideas because societies are now totally reactionary. That's what bothers me as an academic and teaching at the Department of American Culture and Literature. We are more likely to see more, I think, cultural tectonics, the kind of stresses pulling apart society, and this will be reflected in our field and also in the world of literature. But we can't just predict future. We failed, okay? Everybody failed. Everybody failed about it. I teach science fiction, so sometimes you can just good ideas, but 90% of the time you're not very good at it, and which is good. Life just continues to surprise us, not in the ways we desire to be, but I think there are kind of relatively worse times are coming. I'm not sure whether this is the answer to your question, but I can't predict the literature. But
it is an answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we don't have any more questions, and we are out of time, I guess. So I think we can conclude by saying that Vonnegut's works are optimistic in a pessimistic setting, I guess. So, okay, so I'd like to thank Maria for her efforts in organizing this webinar and talking to Professor Cem, who gave us a wonderful lecture today. And also we have the IASA president, Professor Bilge here. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much all the scholars who joined for this webinar. And please visit our website and please stay connected with us to know about further events. Thank you again, Professor Cem, for this wonderful lecture. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.